Hello. Is this thing working? Right. So yeah, it's just me today. Mike is occupied, so I'm holding down the fort for the time being. And sorry for the late start. I had some issues with all of my scenes, but you know what? It's been resolved, and hopefully everything should go smoothly from now onwards. So we have Immortals versus Andbox. Obviously, Andbox had a really amazing run at the Renegades Invitational, and I think a lot of people were very impressed with them. And it's not too surprising that they did well. I think it's just how well they did and how I think unified they looked as a team, and that's something we'll be exploring on this VOD review today. And just make sure my mic levels are good. Awesome. Yeah, so on Split, you know, it's typically a pretty technical map. A lot of teams do like defaulting in North America. But I think one thing that's worth mentioning as well is I think that a team like G2 has shown some of the strengths in having a very set piece oriented style and more contact based style. And I think we're going to see some of those influences here as well. But might as well just get off to it. Normally I'd do like a small talk, you know, to kind of warm things up a little bit, but it's just me and you guys. So I'll probably be leaning on you guys. If you have questions, it's going to be easier to interact with you as it's just me. So we'll have to see how it goes. But and I don't know if you know there's going to be too many more in the future where it's just me. So you know we'll see how it goes, and that's going to be useful information for the next ones if there is more solo episodes like this. Anyway, right. So one of the things about Andbox, because we'll be focusing on their attack as they did so well, that I think is worth noting is the Viper walls, because that's going to be a part of their default. Poachers on the Viper, and Poachers, I think today or yesterday, announced to be signed to the team, and they perhaps would be crazy not to try to sign this team after they did so well. But firstly, what we're going to see here is the typical stuff. We got the Viper wall right at the beginning, as you can see at the top left of the screen. That will go all the way across A ramp and A heaven as well. And we get the Cypher trip wire there also, just to make sure that given that they've given up early presence on that side of the map, early rounds, that they know what's going on with the Cypher trip. You know, very typical stuff in that sense. And it did really seem like they wanted to go for a B split initially. That was their plan, but they did see this dark cover. They killed the cam that was placed by the Cypher, which is, I think Immortals will try to place that cam whenever they feel like they can in B main. So that's punished. The dark cover comes in, and then the boom bot. And so they destroy the boom bot, and that allows them to kind of give some presence, but ultimately they don't want to push through the dark cover, and they also don't want to wait for the dark cover to go away, especially given the fact that the other team could, you know, they could use that time to figure out what they're doing. So instead they decide to just rotate all the way back to A. And again, because they have the Cypher trip up, because they had that presence in B main, they understand that they have this freedom of movement, and this is going to be unbeknownst to the opposition as well. So they're able to then use this Viper wall, and that's kind of the beauty of the Viper wall. You can place it, you know, in many rounds, and the other team's not necessarily going to know, okay, we're seeing this every round. We don't really know what that means because they're using it so frequently. And one thing actually I'll note very quickly is we do get these cages coming in from Seb. Seb does a really good job with these cages, and they have a you know, couple purposes. The cage obviously typically is going to be used to, you know, allow you to cross to A ramp and heaven if that's what you're going for. But also we're going to see from the raise here from Android that he's going to use this as a way to get as deep as possible without having anyone have line of sight to him to get the satchel pushes in. It's just a kind of meager single satchel jump there, but we're going to see more of that, and that's that kind of sage satchel cage satchel combo, which we should be, you know, keeping our eyes on. So this explosion kind of works out quite nicely, and I think this is something that Andbox does pretty well also, is using this Viper wall. They'll often just ignore the top of A ramp and the heaven position entirely, and they'll focus on having, as you can see here, a post-plant setup that is oriented around this A ramp control as well as the site control that they have. And this is obviously really important. You can't just have the site, you got to have site and screens or site in A ramp or just at least one other thing than the site to hold the retake. And it works out quite nicely here. And it's quite safe too, because once you're on your way in with the when you're pushing, you can just leave a player or two at this location to cover that spot. So it's pretty seamless to do that. So pretty successful pistol rounds from them. I like the adaptation, and you know, we see the beginning of the Viper walls, which will be quite important as we go through. In the second round here, obviously, we're dealing with an eco situation, and it's going to be quite interesting actually how Andbox deal with some of these ecos. We see some typical stuff, but we also see, I think it's in this round. Yeah, so in this round, what they do is they try to get this A ramp control because it creates so much pressure. We talk about this quite often. The A ramp is the position. A ramp is the most forward position without being committed to a site, and it's kind of weird to almost think about that because it does feel like you're kind of in the site when you have A ramp, because you kind of push for that main choke point around A lobby and the bottom of A ramp, and you get to the top of it, and it feels kind of like you're on the site. And that's kind of the point, is that it feels so threatening to the A bomb site that you can, because basically if you have that top A ramp position, you can clear anyone in A heaven possibly, which clears angles for the players who would come to through the lower position onto the site. So here we see the tripwire towards the ramen position from Seb, and they're going to try use that camera, just like keep the pressure up. The wall goes up as well. They're really trying to sell a lot of presence towards A. Meanwhile, you can see that Immortals went with a B main push. So Immortals are completely convinced at this point this has to be an A hit. And so you see just a really fast rotation here. And the cool thing about this is that you can see the Panic's rotation, the speed of it. And Andbox are keeping their pace pretty slow. You can see they've gotten this top A ramp control. They've denied vision with the Viper smoke, and the Viper wall goes up as well. It's a lot of confusion. The entire team of Immortals is invested into this position. Again, they're on an eco, so they want to use the numbers advantage. And then now we have them having to just forcibly clear this position. They have to understand what happened. And in the midst of all that, we have this big rotation that came in. We can watch it again, how this rotation, the timing of this, because this is great from Andbox. And just as they get this upper A ramp control, you can see Poachers there with Seb. The bomb is already rotating. They're already understanding that they can use the utility that Viper has to delay here. So this is fantastic, and they've completely outmaneuvered their opposition. The other thing that's worth noting here as well is the positioning of Boy there in the bottom mid position throughout most of this round. He's able to hear everything, and they know that they pretty much can be fairly certain that Immortals would have run most of their players across because of how panicked they were. So it's a lot of info there for Boy to be able to kind of lead the push through B Heaven, and boom, beautiful. That's a really great way to punish something that is, I think, a principle that goes into all eco rounds. On all eco rounds, you want to try to win the round, but you're completely outgunned. So you want to take the earliest information you can to try to gamble so that you can have all the players in one place, because that's your best chance at holding a push, is if all 5 of you are there. So that's what you're looking for. So I think in CS, what I often said was that, on the eco, the defenders are quite light on their feet. They're quite happy to kind of rotate off of information that wouldn't necessarily be enough in a gun round. So that's kind of what we see here. Right, so if we move now into the third round, we're going to start seeing what I was talking about previously. This is really cool, actually. This next round, I think, shows, I think, just something that I've always liked about what G2 do on Split, which is they have these really strong, they just know how to entry correctly onto the A site. So they have these fast explosion kind of pushes. And this is a little replay here in the VOD. And into the rounds. Oh, okay. There we go. So you can see they're kind of set up for this. So we're going to just look at exactly how they execute this, and we'll go from there. So we have that. Interestingly, we have a cipher trip. You can see at the towards the site entrance towards A, which typically could be problematic. But part of the point of this again is we'll get that cage from Seb, that Viper wall coming in again as part of their default. And again, one of the things that they're showing here with that Viper wall is that they're actually using it quite often. It is quite often that they're actually using it to gain control around the A side, even if they don't commit there. So it is already, some conditioning that's happening with regards to that. We don't get the cam shot of it here. We get Boy throwing the paranoia into the back site. So if there's anybody back site, then now the satchel push will come in from Android. You can see there, and Android will be doing this often, and he can use his paint bombs to clear the elbow position as well. So you can see that if anyone's backside, they get paranoid and Android will kill them. If anybody's kind of trying to juke him around the elbow position, if they don't get a really good timing on him, and we'll actually see that later on, that someone does find a timing on him, it will be the case that the paint bombs can also clear that position as his teammates move into the site. This is somewhat reminiscent of, the typical jet dash plays that Mixwell will do with his, with G2. And this is pretty effective. And again, this is against a full gun round. So we can quickly just double check and see, okay, what was the opposition doing? Were they in any non-standard kind of a setup? And we can see that, they're not really in a non-standard setup. It's actually quite standard. They've got their, at the moment, they've got their jet backside on A. And they'll kind of switch that job between jet and Phoenix. And they've got the trip in ropes, which allows them to have that warning system and not have to play anybody in ropes, which is I would say pretty common in North America at the moment, and also in Europe from from most of the VODs I've seen. And they're spreading the trips out around the other trip is lower on A. So pretty standard, honestly. Very passive opening, and this gets punished, I would say, pretty heavily by this push. We can watch it one more time. Skip forwards, we can see the satchel, the paranoia goes through, the satchel and the paint bombs. And at the same time, you can see the movement from the whole team. You've got all these cages all over the place, the Viper walls, the Viper smoke. And one thing to note as well is that the Viper smoke is actually not deep so that it's covering the choke of screens, but is set up in a way which I think is kind of interesting because, we have to think about the dynamic of Viper smokes. And I don't know if this is the reason why they've done this or not, but you can deny people coming in from screens with that smoke, but it's interesting that you have the ability that if they do get through onto the site out of screens, that you have the ability to pop that smoke up and down for more post-plant shenanigans. And especially given the angles that they're holding, they also create a situation where, they don't have to worry too much about heaven at the moment. It's mostly kind of elbow and this smoke will cover line of sight away from screens, so that any player would be coming through screens would be funneled completely through the elbow position, where there is at least 2 players to deal with that. So it's an interesting approach to it. Again, I'm not 100% sure if that smoke placement is going to be consistent, but I think there is some merit to it. And it's part of what makes Viper as well, is the ability, like unlike other agents, you can pop a smoke up and down, which gives you the ability to play scenarios differently than a typical smoke, which you commit into a choke point usually. Right. So I'm just looking at my notes here. Got my laptop next to me. Okay, so round 4. Yes. So this is going to be, we're going into like a half buy situation, obviously. I'm not actually sure how much they invested, but they're in that kind of territory. They could invest a little bit of money here if they wanted to. We can see that there's a sheriff purchase there, but otherwise it looks like it'll be a fairly light investment from Immortals. And in this round again, we're going to see that Andbox are going to continue. Oh, by the way, it's worth noting that Seb is owning everyone, and Immortals have only gotten 2 kills so far, so that's obviously not ideal. But one thing to note with this as well is we're going to see continued A pressure and continued A control from Andbox, which is going to be really powerful. So typical, the cam, that goes up there from Cypher. The early round utility from Cypher is so useful on Split. You can check for so many things, and it can really help you in so many different ways. And you can see that they're able to actually just walk straight up a ramp through their smokes. We can watch how they did that again. The cage goes up as it typically does from Seb, and the wall goes up, which, again, the Jet wants to respect the wall, especially given that Jet's only on a pistol there for Immortals. So is that JC Stanley? That was a JMO. Okay. So yeah, they get a ramp control. And we've seen this before, right? We saw this in a round prior where they got this, really forward presence. We get Poach throwing that Viper smoke pretty deep. And that Viper smoke is amazing, actually, in that position. I'm really liking that for a variety of reasons. You can't quite see it outlined very clearly on the map. And I don't have the zoom set up like Mike does, but it's set up in such a way that we might be able to see it here. Yeah, it's set up in such a way that, like, if teammates are coming up ropes, it's going to be a lot easier for them to get up ropes, which is really interesting. And you can see that's part of the idea here, is to have this ability to get up ropes and get onto the edge site. Now, what's interesting is that because the pace has been slowed down, I think Andbox would realize that the rotation, they've given a lot of time for rotation, and they've got their breach in mid, which is, I think, Yaster, who's able to kind of watch for any of that and also keep anything open if necessary, if anyone's going to be crossing from mid. And at this point, you can assume that if you've seen nobody mid, at most you're going to have one player around B heaven, probably at most, but it's probably quite likely at this point that most players have rotated. Again, because of that principle we talked about previously, which is that on an anti-eco, or rather, I should say, when the team is playing the eco, they want to rotate off of as little information as they can so that they can get in position as quickly as possible. And once again, it's punished. And this is just because of, this time we had the mid control. Well, much like the previous time when I mentioned how, we had Boy there kind of looking after mid for his team caused an entire rotation. And then because of Yeaster's position this time in mid, is able to have that information and know that it's pretty damn safe and that they can just rotate and just out-position their opponents. So it's, there's definitely a world where they could try to challenge the pistols and would probably win all the fights. But this is a way better way to win. It's far more consistent. And it also feels a lot worse to be on the receiving end of, to be completely out-positioned and feel like you didn't even get to have a fight. And you didn't even get that chance of that 1D that maybe you'll get. And maybe it'll make you feel slightly better about yourself. But ultimately, they have been denied. So I'm loving the focus around trying to get that positional checkmate from Andbox. I think it shows, great promise moving forward, because I think, again, that's just a very important approach to have. Some teams like to just position themselves so they feel like they have a strong coordinated attack and they win on the gunfights. I feel like G2 are like that a lot of the time, and you can't blame them because they're so successful with it. So it also necessitates that you have players on your team that are able to understand and read the game and communicate all of that effectively in the mid round too. So Andbox is, they're having a really good start with all of this, and we'll be moving into the next round, which is a gun round, and this is round 5. Okay, so we're gonna get I think we're gonna get, unless my notes are. Yeah, so we're going to get, oh yes, this is unfortunate. This is, we talked about it, conditioning of A and the pressure around A, and then that wall will go up, and then pretty much every time there's been presence around A. This time we're going to, have Andbox keeping Seb on that cipher towards A ramp, making sure that that pressure exists, but Andbox is setting up around B main, as you can see. Now the timing is kind of unfortunate, because in this moment, we're actually seeing that, I think as a response to all of the A aggression, Immortals are going to decide to try to get some information and try to make a small play here with Phoenix. Now, what's really unfortunate is if they did a paranoia play here instead with Omen. I think that obviously that would be the ideal scenario, but they can't know that. And so they used the Phoenix flash there. Andrew was able to get out of position, so he's not punished, but Poach is able to catch Gangster. So that's a really huge loss. And you can see how grossly out of position Immortals are currently. They have 2 players on the site, but that's it. So they're in this very fragile position that if Andbox decide that they want to go in off of that kill and they're going to have a coordinated attack off of that, then there shouldn't be a way Immortals can stop it. And so here we're going to see this typical satchel opening coming through from Android. It's not super clean on the movement, but it still gets the job done. And the fact that Andbox have effectively, they've got this situation whereby they're able to react. And I'm sure that a lot of you have played matchmaking, right? And this can happen in the pro level too, especially in a game like this where maybe you don't have the right agents in the right spots to capitalize, but they're in a position that off of the bat, even if they wanted to go for that without getting that opening kill, if they didn't anticipate that aggression, whatever it was, they have the ability to throw the paranoia out to get the satchel pushes with the through the cages and everything. It's pretty robust and pretty versatile and agile in terms of what they can do with this, with these agents. And so long as it goes well, as long as Android can get out with the satchels, it seems like the follow-ups have been pretty good ultimately. And the flashes as well coming in from Yeaster on the breach are obviously quite a devastating follow-up. So in terms of just explosive strength, in terms of the contact play, it's really good. It's really, really good. And the fact that they can do that reactively is also really good. So again, typical stuff here, moving into the next round. This is round 6. And we're going to get another A rush, basically, with that cage from Seb going up. You can't see it right now. And Gangster will once again get caught out going for a flash push. The Viper Wall's protecting them from the top of A ramp. and they're able to systematically clear through here. And Android's not having the best time with his satchels the last couple rounds, but again, doesn't really matter too much. They're against an eco and they get fast position, so it's kind of it at this point. There's not really all that much else to say. It's you can see everybody trying to collapse onto the bomb there, but weapon superiority and all of that. So cleaning up nicely. So 6-0, great start so far from Andbox. I think just as a review, I think there's a few things that's really great. One, there is a game plan. There's a strategical foundation which exists off of the A control and having Viper, having the wall, and trying to make sure that they can condition their opponent in the first half of the first half, and they can then use that in later rounds. We first saw that when they put 4 players towards B main. They're able to either catch an aggression, and the thing is that once you've done that conditioning towards A, there's a few ways that can be responses from the defenders. So when you're thinking about your strategies and your openings and how you condition your opponent, what you're basically doing with conditioning is you're narrowing the decision-making options for your opposition. And in so doing, what you're doing is you're saying, well, you only have these many options and these are your good options. And so then you know what their options are. You may not be able to predict it every time, but you can kind of incorporate this into what your next rounds will look like when you call them in the opening at least. And you can have certain things that can allow you to adapt because you kind of already maybe know what's going to happen. So for example, in that round previously where we saw 4 players stacking towards B main, they had the Viper wall still towards A, they had the cages towards A still. So it kind of looked the same at the opening, but they have 4 players in B main. What does that deal with? Well, it catches any B main aggression, which is exactly what happened. That is one of the responses that may come from a team that's getting abused on the early A side of the map. Because what that would give the defenders is, if B main is clear, they can have Cypher drop a camera in there, and then they can completely rotate out of it if they feel like that's necessary. They could try and actually push B main. I'd like just have a walk push there. They could maybe try to catch a lurk if there's a lurk there with a 2-man push, or if it's a 1-man push, you can clear out the trips. This creates a time pressure for the attackers, because if they haven't committed to an A push, they know that there's players on the other side of the map and that the defenders have full information. So it allows the defenders to take the initiative. It allows the defenders to put the attackers in a bad position. So this is like one of the reasons why going aggressive on the opposite side of the map, as you would expect to see the attackers, is a pretty good play. So we can see that, if you throw in that B main play every so often, you're mindful of that, you might catch that. And that was the case, around a couple rounds ago. And similarly, you're looking for that mid aggression, and you want to be able to think, well, if they do aggress in a certain position, what is our response going to be? Because you have to kind of, as quickly as they take something, you want to try to quickly take something else. So like if they take B main control with 2 or 3 players, you want to try to take more control in mid or more control in A. So you want to have that kind of equilibrium as opposed to them just getting ahead. So I just wanted to make a few comments as to how you might want to think about what your opponent's options will be once you've conditioned them, because that will help you to have a better game plan overall. So as we move into the 7th round, we're actually I think we're going to start seeing some rounds get won by Immortals here. And we spoke about the importance of forward control, and we will get some B main control. And you can see already there's a slightly more of a mid focus, but this is I think been most typically the default setup or close to it from Andbox, where we get both Poach and Seb on the Viper and the Cypher towards A lobby, and able to throw the Viper wall up towards A and keep that pressure with the cages, and you really don't know what's going to happen. And possibly they can even take A ramp control by themselves. That's also an option. And you have the trip that's set up towards Ramen, so that if there is a B main aggression and they get far, you're at least covered for that, and you have the ability to defend any mid plays. And also you can develop splits off of the info that you get in mid. So as we see this round play out, we're going to see that Immortals will win that B main control. There's nobody there. Cypher gets to place that forward camera in the corner of B main, and that allows him to rotate off. He leaves Jet there for a moment. And we're going to get this A pressure with the wall from Viper and Cypher. And what's interesting here is that we haven't had much male play at all on the gun rounds from Andbox so far. And in this round, they'll actually decide to go for it. But if I I think it's in my notes actually. They do actually fail this push, so spoilers. But there you go. You can see Shot Up just got a perfect timing there. You can see the satchel on the ground. So that Shot Up just found a timing in which I think both Android and Boy were just like about to go in, just pulling abilities out. So it was perfect timing, very unlucky, I would say. But, you know, a great execution from Shot Up to get those 2 kills cleanly and pushing forward now with the rocket, expecting maybe to see more players here, and we'll get caught in the back by Ye, who was lurking ropes. So after a situation like this happens, and you get into the mid round, at least for Andbox's sake, they're able to trade onto Shot Up thanks to Ye around ropes, and Seb was able to catch a 1v1 up a ramp. So the problem is that they first have to get the spike. Now they have the trip up, so they understand that they can go and get that spike and it should be okay. And they have a ramp control. And this is known by Immortals. Immortals, however, don't know about the spike situation. So you can see that Immortals are looking to try to play things fairly safe in terms of how they rotate. And they can rely on Cypher's utility because he's still alive and he has that cam up in B main, and there's that trip up on B heaven and a trip in ropes. So that's huge. And in a 3v3 like this, where you're hurting, you've got spots all over the map, which are maybe blind spots. You know, Cypher really makes up for that in a big way. And so Andbox do pretty much anything they can reasonably, which is to continue to take A heaven control. And because of the previous action, Breach, you know, Yesa knows that he has passage through to the A heaven position. And unfortunately, Neptune will actually catch them, and the game is kind of given up. So I think there's definitely a series of unfortunate events here, but that's kind of just how this can go sometimes. Ultimately, I think that they made the right decisions. I don't think that you could look back at that and think, oh, they made a decision, a mistake with how they did their decision making as a team. I think that they did what they could, and you can see that they get caught just at the wrong time here. And actually, Boy tried to trade that on the swing, but yeah, there it is. So that's the first round on the board for Immortals after a very, very devastating first 6 rounds. So we get to see the default coming in again on round 8 from Andbox. So, and at this point, you know, one thing that's worth noting as well when you're calling and when you're kind of thinking about team strategy is trying to understand exactly, you know, what is the deal. Now they've picked up a round, you know, their economy might be starting to stabilize if they survive with a lot of players. You know, what are they thinking to do, especially on the defense? What do we go to? There's almost this there's this little mind game at this point where the defenders might be thinking, well, would they go to the thing that worked the best? Because once you win a round, obviously, as I mentioned, your economy can start to recover, but it's the most devastating time to lose a round again, especially if you didn't manage to survive with many players. So in this kind of a round, you'd often want the attackers to throw out a round that's been very successful so far. And I would say that, let's say, so far, that kind of an answer for Andbox has been what they used in the 3rd round, which is that, you know, really fast contact play into the A bomb site. Now, that is not what they decide to go with in this case. It's actually more of a passive spread where we can see that Yesa actually has the spike by himself towards outside of B main or B lobby. And once again, we get the Cypher cam there and B main control. So Immortals are able to get that initial early map control win that they got in the previous round, which helped them quite a lot. And they're going to rely on that cam and have 3 stacked in B heaven. So as we can see here, you know, Andbox is moving towards B main. They've got the presence from Viper and Cypher towards the A position. And it's also really interesting because when you show Viper in this position, what does that mean? And I think that's quite an interesting dynamic, because I know that when we had Steel on the podcast, the live show on a few Saturdays ago, he was talking about one of the weaknesses of Viper. He said, Viper needs to survive. If Viper's going to really truly be impactful, Viper needs to survive, because when she dies, all of her utility falls down. And and also the thing with Cypher as well is Cypher's the same. Like, Cypher needs to survive. So you're running 2 agents right now that need to survive. So there's kind of an interesting dynamic in that sense, because what does it mean when you see Cypher, walking up a ramp? It feels like he's lurking. That's typically what's going to be happening. But how do you interpret seeing Viper in this position? What does that mean? It's always important to kind of understand what that information gives to the other team. And in this case, what's quite cool about it is that it's just a case that I think Andbox are trying to create that question mark. They're trying to create that sense of unknowingness in what the defenders are seeing, and mixing up the lurk between Cypher and Viper. So anyway, we do see that Posh does get caught, and Seb gets caught in mid as well, trying to move across on the lurk. So that actually kind of, I think, gives up what's happening here. You can see that even before there's really all that much information, after that pick, Immortals can understand, based on what they've seen so far, that it has to be a B main play at this point. So they're kind of ready for this, all eyes towards that location. I think the cam was, when was the cam destroyed? Yeah, so the cam sees it as well at the same time. After that kill in mid, they pop the cam. So you can see how far ahead Immortals are. This is just an incredibly impossible situation for Andbox to be in, given the fact that they don't have anything at this point to work with. It's not like before where they had a ramp control still. So, we'll see. We'll just skip ahead a little bit, like 5 seconds here, 5 seconds there. Now, I think this is quite a good response, is popping the ult to try to clear space. One of the difficult parts of being in a position like this, if you're Andbox, is that, what do you do? Like, you don't have any control. We just talked about that. One way you can buy control really quickly is with the ultimate from Raze, the showstopper, because when people hear that, they just fall back. So, and it's typically, you can get very quickly onto a site from this mid through male through be heaven position. The showstopper will force people back quite far. Unfortunately for Android, he does get caught because JMO's holding a really good spot here on the rafters. But I think the idea was good, given what they had to work with. And again, it doesn't feel like a waste, given that they don't seem in any way reliant on the showstopper for any of their other set plays. So, I like that a lot. And at this point, it's kind of over. So it was a good effort, but Immortals are finally starting in this match to like get a grip of the situation. And it has stemmed a little bit from that B main control, that cam. And that's something that, once you've been, kind of exploited by that in a sense, once you've realized the opponent's got an advantage like that, it is quite punishable. And you can see actually the ping that comes in right now. There's a ping that comes in right now at the back of B main where that cam's being placed, and they want to try to punish that cam for getting placed there. So this is round 9. And so one of the things that I noticed immediately on this round, and I think that Immortals would notice as well, and I was kind of curious about this. It's a shame Mike is not here, but you guys can tell me what you think of this. I'm just looking at chat. What's up, Aaron? Oh, stop Android. I haven't looked at the chat. I'm just like talking so constantly that I was like, I'm going to interact with the chat because I'm here by myself. But I'm like looking at my laptop, looking at the screen. You just got outplayed that round. Yeah. It's definitely, so it looks like, you guys are like noticing that the cam went up there and that's an issue that you can deal with. And so the clearance is going to come there. But one of the things that I found interesting about this round is it's the first round where we don't have the Viper wall going through, that I can remember going through onto the A site at the beginning of the rounds. So that's an interesting prospect, because I wonder for Immortals, when you don't see that, you've got to be thinking, what's going on? The alarm bells have to be ringing at that point. And we're going to see that the Viper wall is going to be used kind of like the Sage wall used to be used on these attacks into the B site. And the cam's going to get placed. That would have been heard. They can destroy the cam. I think he's trying to find it. He can't find it. There we go. And you can see already the rotations coming in. They already know there's no Viper wall towards the A side of the map. They're trying to kill the cam instantly. The dark cover's coming through. We have a forward position from Jet on A. So at this point, Immortals are kind of safe to operate on the assumption that the B hit's coming. Now, the question here is how good the execution is from Andbox. Because one of the things I think that's, again, this is like a thing in the lower levels. It doesn't matter necessarily if a team knows what you're doing, if what you're executing is very strong. And, presumably if they don't have, an overwhelming defense. Like right now, they have the rotation coming in, and there will be players to defend this. But if the entry is really good and the setup is really good off of that coordinated attack, then you can still do a really good job in just winning rounds like this with brute force. That's what G2 are very good at doing, for example. They've shown that works. And again, we see that. So let's look at that from Android again. Instead of using the cage for this, he uses the dark cover. I think there is maybe a cage there as well somewhere. Stuff all over the place. But double satchel deals with the player backside. So this is like Android's major job in this match is these satchel plays on the entry. And you can see how much space it clears. The Viper wall is up, so there's no one. I mean, they could try to spray from be heaven and maybe get lucky through the wall, but ultimately, you know, we have a protected push. The backsite's cleared, and at this point, it's a really strong spot, and the wall can go down so that they can now take fights together. Now look at this as well. Look how they have, I think maybe like 3 players here ready to be able to just be the firing squad behind this wall when it goes down. And they've also got info coming through from, I think, yeah, so they've got info coming through. For a second there, I thought that the JC Stanley was, boy, and that would be really weird. But yeah, they've got all the info as well. And look at the way that they're controlling the fights too. Again, it's just like, it's really important to understand that when you're designing these plays, like you want to be obviously trying to control where the gunfights are. If you know where everything is going to go down, you can be very prepared. It's just going to go super well, exactly like this. The wall goes down, and what happens? They just get instantly deleted. Great angles. You can see that there's so much of a worry from JC Stanley to deal with the position around default plant. And you can see like Boy has an angle on him from around the B main entrance, which is awesome because from that position as well, there's like nobody else on the team who's in that spot. So it does give that extra angle to the team. And at this point, it's a bit of a disaster. And what's interesting too is that we could, one other thing to think about is that if we go back into this position where they know what's going on and rotations coming in, and we mentioned about how like it doesn't matter too much if the rotation's coming in, so long as you have a well-executed attack. The other thing here as well is that when a team does think that they have time to actually defend the site, they're going to commit players to defending the site. So they're going to fight you. So if you have a tactical superiority in the way that you execute, that's a huge bonus actually, because you just get to win by getting the kills in advantage. They have to do everything reactively, where pretty much whilst you're doing everything again as you've coordinated with players in the positions that you've decided. And again, I might be reading into this a little bit too much, but it looked to me to be quite coordinated. There's one kill I think coming up from Android and on the A side that I thought was pretty juicy off of the satchels, which might be next actually. Let me see. Right, so okay, this is pretty straightforward. They managed to hunt down JMO. Nice bonus, getting rid of the operator. And right, get a little replay here as well. So I was replaying this a lot also, so get a lot of this action here onto the site. And all right, that's going to be round 10. Right, so this is... Okay, so I think quite a few things happen in this round, which is going to be interesting. I think this is one of the rounds where... I think this is one of the hardest, was maybe the hardest round, I think, for Andbox. We'll see. But we have, again, what looks like the default. We've got the Viper wall going up towards A again. So, normalcy has resumed. We've got the Ramen trip. We've got Boy towards Ramen. And we've got more mid control play here. They've got Ye ready with the flashes on the breach. And we've also got Android in position with the Rays as well to deal with any mid shenanigans and just take that early mid control. And I like this quite a lot, especially because as a switch up, we've seen that Andbox have shown Immortals that Immortals can't get that cam in B main for free anymore. Now, just because Immortals, Andbox aren't B main in this round in particular, Immortals still have to work with the assumption that they were getting an advantage by getting that cam in B main. That was a reaction that they got. Then what happened was Andbox decided that, okay, we can't let them have that advantage. We're going to punish it. And so for a couple rounds in a row, Andbox, again, conditioned their opponent to now think that that's really risky. If I try to go for B main control, that's really risky. So I'm not going to do it anymore. So this kind of frees Andbox up a little bit to not have to put any resources towards B main. And at the same time, we see them settling back into a modified version of their default with more mid control coming through. And obviously the adjustment Immortals are making to try to take the initiative, which is really good, is using their jet to try to get that opening pick towards that A lobby position, holding that deeper angle. And at the same time, so that's happening at the same time as this mid control. So I'm just going to play it again. So there's the satchel play coming through, the boombot getting bounced all over the place, and ropes control for Android. And one thing that's really interesting here too is that, generally speaking, you're going to be able to get into ropes probably quite safely. So I love the that we get the dark cover towards the male position, because you're kind of taking ropes. And what's really cool here as well is that, you know, you have the option to try to deal with the trip. You don't necessarily know if anyone's hiding in there, but a lot of teams place the trip there, and they kind of over rely on having a trip in the ropes position. So it can be really nice at an early timing to go and clear that trip. I don't think Android, I'm not sure if Android does that or not. Actually, it looks like he's doing that right now. So it can clear the trip. So this is really interesting. So from this point, I think what's really cool is that Andbox really wanted to have that A ramp control. I mean, we saw the typical opening that would allow for that. They got denied it by the push, by the presence from Immortals. So it makes the round kind of a little bit weird, I think, for Andbox in that respect, because you've got your Viper and your Cypher respecting the aggression and force back around a lobby. And at the same time, you have your teammates who have that mid control towards ropes. So there's like there's like a few different ways that this can play out. So we'll see what decision Andbox decides to go for. So they go for the play up ropes eventually, and JMO's looking for that play with a jet and dashes away. So really unfortunate there, because the cam was available, I think, for Seb, but they didn't understand that JMO was making that operator dash play. So that's a huge pick. Now, what's interesting here as well is, again, like, what do Andbox actually know about this round so far? They've not seen anything in mid, and especially given the fact that Immortals just got a pick towards A, this is a situation whereby you're not going to be as scared if you're Immortals, and you're not going to be in a position where you're going to be thinking about over-rotating. You're probably going to keep people in what is being the more typical formations. However, I think Andbox, in seeing that Jet was aggressive A main, the question mark is, do they have any extra players to help with that early play? Because that's typically how that works. And so it may be the case that they understand Jet is a ramp, but they don't understand that there is another player a ramp. So I've actually liked how this played out, because what we get is a reset. So when this happens, when there's a pause, you can see how long that pause is. The question is, are they rotating at them at this time? Like, this is the question for the defenders. We got that pick. We don't see them. We don't have any info. We lost the trip in ropes. After getting, killing that trip in ropes, we know they have mid control. They could rotate to B now, and then we can't really stop that. They throw the dark cover there on B main to slow anything down, but ultimately it's just a question of holding positions at this point. Because they have the 5 versus 4, they just need to hold the positions, which they don't, which they're open to, which is as you can see, is all the spots they're holding. They've got the passive hold on B, the passive hold on B heaven. They've got the possibility for crossfires on A heaven, and they've got a trip on the lower A spot. So they're willing to concede the A ramp position, but they know that there's not that many players there. So they've kind of owned this in terms of the way that they've set up in this position of the round. And obviously hindsight is 2020. And I think that Andbox do a pretty good job here. So we're going to see a breach flash to deal with this. And this is a great angle from Neptune. So breach flash comes through and Neptune gets flashed. They may have been trying to flash the Jet, who is actually in a position where Jet's hiding right now. And you can see Gangster's able to get a double, which really makes a huge difference. So there it is. And the trades come through and it's a 1v2. So like, all things considered, I feel like it's actually a great result for Andbox, even though they're still in disadvantage. But how the round played out, they didn't really have many options. It was played really well by Immortals, I feel like. And we can kind of skip through this because it's able to get towards B. Very passive play there on the side of Immortals to play it safe. And we get the cam going into spawn. And I kind of like this play with the cam in spawn, like pushing in front of it, because when the cam goes into spawn, what does an opponent maybe think when he hears that? Oh, Cypher's using the camera to give information on this angle, so why would he push it? He doesn't need to push it. So there we go. I'm going to look at the chat again. Okay. Shit, I have to go back. Where am I going back to? Aaron, which is this round? Oh my god, I have to go back all this way. I'm going to catch it. I'm going to assume it's this round because I've been talking for ages, so... I'm just waiting to see if this is if you do anything here. Are you just trying to swing? Can't really see very well there. Yeah, maybe I guess it was the last round. Well, you can tell me if which round it is, and I'll go to it. Right. So, okay. So Immortals are starting to do a good job in sort of bringing things back a little bit, and what I think is kind of cool here now, and I was teasing it a little bit earlier. We get a really nice opening double satchel play coming through now from Mr. Android, and this is just one of those rounds. It's just a fast rush. Again, it's about the execution. They make it look at the very, very beginning like most rounds with the cage, with the wall and everything else. There is enough tells though to start a rotation, but again, it doesn't matter. It's the same thing. See how juicy that is? This is just gorgeous. Boom. Straight in the face. And the awesome rocket follow-up. So yeah, this is just one of those things where it's a great execution. A lot of the rounds have been slower paces as well, and so to have these rounds that you can go to in your pocket, whereby the other team is, all you have to do is deal with that site anchor. If you can deal with the site anchor like quickly, these rounds can fall apart just almost immediately, and that's exactly what happened here. Even the Viper roll even went down as well. So yeah, Andbox have a really nice time here. Okay, so we're almost at the end of this half, and I just planned only to do the attacking side of Andbox because it was awesome. It feels pretty well-rounded. What I think is interesting, as a quick note, as we kind of let this play out, is that I'm curious to see how Andbox will perform with other tests, with more tests, because it feels like their gameplay is pretty good. But one thing I think that's worth noting as well is that teams are learning just learning who they are, what their identity is, how they play, their compositions, and so on and so forth. So it's really interesting to see if these approaches will continue to work moving forwards. Because we're actually going to see, I think, in this particular case, because we get another A hit. Immortals expect this A hit now. So this is kind of playing into what I'm talking about. We get the cage, Andrew's going to satchel through, and Gangster's going to play his Phoenix in a way where he's able to he dodges the flash, he plays elbow, and he catches Android perfectly. So that's the adjustment. Android has been, I think, every time he's gone into A, his trajectory off of the satchels has been pretty consistent. I think one time he went behind the sign and I think that was an anti-eco though. But otherwise it's been pretty consistent. And again, we do see, as I mentioned before, the placement of that Viper smoke is awesome, and I'm loving that that's a consistent placement. But this does get kind of crushed. We can go back and see exactly what Immortals did right again, but it does really start with this. We talked about how important it is to deal with the site anchor. Great dodge of the paranoia from Gangster, able to dodge the play from Android as well, takes him down. They have Cypher below the rafters, and able to just create delay. And now this is a huge issue because they don't have any control of the site, and there is still a player back site. There's player screens coming through. They don't have A having control either. This is a spot where you have to be able to fight your way out with very constricted space, and it's just very difficult. The breach ult comes in very late, and that's something that I think I was expecting to see earlier. If we go back, we have the option for a breach ult earlier. So it's interesting, and I think that would be, I guess, like one of the things that you'd want to revise is, possibly they would want to save the breach ult for post plant. The post plants haven't even been necessary so far because every time Andbox has actually executed into the sites, they've done a great job in making that execution actually just destroy the site anchor, and then they take the site, and they have an overwhelming advantage just off of that. And there hasn't really been any retakes where Immortals look like they could maybe do it. And so that's an interesting thing. Maybe they were looking to save it for the retake, because you can see here that there is this reliance on this initial play that fails. As soon as that play fails, they don't gain any ground. They're just stuck. As soon as that fails, it's stuck. And so that's kind of a problem, because the breach ult as well, Do you want to just breach all that one player? Probably not. And that's kind of also the issue, that the breach ult on the B side is a lot easier. From B main, you can get, you know, backside. Well, you can't get backside, but you can get B heaven. You can get, you know, around the actual planting spots as well, if there's any players like around there. So there's like lots of options to kind of deal with the site if you're trying to hit B. But on A, it's a little bit more tricky to land a good breach ult. So that's unfortunate, but there it is. Immortals will finish with 4 rounds, and again, to recap, I think we saw a lot of really cool stuff from Andbox in this one. They were able to condition their opponents. They knew when to use that conditioning to kind of take advantage by either setting up traps where you know, let's say the B main trap, where they have a trap where if there's nothing that happens there, they don't have to push, but they do have the push available to them. They have that in their playbook to execute onto the site if they want to. You know, they have the ability to rotate out. We saw that on the pistol round, and then hit the A site and execute there. So it's always dangerous in that sense. If they, for any reason, don't like that, you know, maybe the initial choice of a site, they can always go and change their mind, and that works with how they're playing. They have the Viper and the Cypher lurking towards the A side of the map, and that's something that, you know, I think has been really interesting, because it allows you to create more question marks for the defenders. It's harder to know what it actually means when you see the wall and the cages going up. They have a really nice composition to take forward grounds between, you know, the paranoia and the satchels. Seems absolutely key, and obviously the breach with the support flashes to kind of cover the other eventualities on the entries. All looks like really good. And actually trying to get to a spot where we see the Viper and the Cypher. All that stuff looks really, really good. And also they understand like changing pace. One thing that I thought was really cool is the A ramp pressure plays. This is something I think we need to see more teams doing, is taking a ramp control or having setups where they can have a ramp control within the default, and then just forcing the rotation. Some teams will make mistakes. Like, you'll be able to trigger teams to respond to losing certain bits of the map, and they may respond badly, and you can punish that and just win the round off of that. And that's a very strong position to be in. If you find something that the other team doesn't know how to respond to correctly, and that's something you can then go to abuse later on. We also saw the splits as well as like, you know, understanding rotations and punishing rotations. So there's just like a lot here that was really good, I think, from Andbox. And Immortals kind of struggled to take initiative, and that's I think split, unfortunately. And part of the reason too, I think, is that we had not really that much of a mid approach from Immortals, and that's something that maybe they could think about in the future. But ultimately, yeah, I think that was a great game from Andbox. If you guys have any questions or anything you want to talk about, how much do we have to pay to stop analyzing? I don't know, man. You just put me in front of a screen. I just talk forever. I think that's just how it works. Where's the M blinding from? On the A main plays? We can go find that for you. I think as we had it in the last round, so we can just, it's an easy one. Right, so here is the M flash from a pretty typical spot. You can see it on the minimap there. Going out in that little cubby at the bottom of a ramp. Oh, it actually missed. Oh, that's so unfortunate. Not only does it miss. Oh, actually, okay. This is a round where it actually works out. This is the penultimate round of the first half. But yeah, that's where the M flash is coming from. That little cubby there. Right. Yeah, whenever you do stuff by yourself on broadcast, you do feel this like pressure to like always talk, because if you don't talk, it's like, dead air is happening. I'm going to quickly scroll through the chat a little bit as well to see if I missed any questions. Thank you all for like hanging out as well, by the way. I made the mistake whereby I switched to Streamlabs OBS recently to actually for my own stream as well as for this, to make this easier. But then I added in all of the scenes and everything for Immortal Minds. I added all of that in on my Twitch account, not the Immortal Minds Twitch account. So then I was like, oh, okay, time to log in and do the show. And it's like, oh, crap. All of my scenes, I need to rebuild all of them. Nice. So that was a mistake I made. That's why we were a bit delayed this morning. Right. Okay. I'm not seeing any questions, guys. If there's no questions, I don't know what to talk about, man. I guess we can play the VOD on a little bit. We usually do a little bit of, of extra rounds, and if you guys give you guys the opportunity to chat a little bit if you want to. Let's get into the second half at least, and let that start playing. Okay. Well, they're doing a little recap, the half recap with replays. Cool. I didn't actually see this live, so I didn't see all of the fancy production. I think it's interesting with Viper. I think that Steel raised some good points, but there is definitely, and as we can see on Split in particular, there's a lot of stuff that works really nicely with Viper, and I think that's on other maps as well, like binds. I think this is something that me and Mike have already mentioned a bunch of times. We've seen some like really creative stuff on bind with Viper as well that looks really good and makes it look quite viable. It just really depends though on how teams will start to interpret what the best compositions will look like. One of the things we talked to Def about when we had him on with Sideshow last weekend was that this game is going to be a lot about having stuff that's hidden and just running stuff against teams whereby they haven't maybe experienced that before, and that's they're going to see stuff and be like, oh, I don't know what that means, and that's going to be a huge thing. In CS, there's a lot that comes down to maybe what stuff means, especially if you've studied in other teams. There's a lot more opportunity to do that, and it's more about like mechanics and just executing really well and having those pre-set up and pre-practiced responses to certain things, and then relying on those mechanics. But in this game, there's like so many options for tactics and how you can take positions, how you can open up sites, how you can play defaults and so on, that it is going to be very important for teams to try and hide stuff as much as they possibly can. Whereas again, in CS, it's not as much of a problem. So it's an interesting dynamic. Once teams start to get used to playing you, how does that impact how good you are? That's like an element to you as a team that's going to determine how much you can stay on top. And I think we will see lots of teams go up and go down quickly because of this fact. And there will be certain teams that, have that quality where they can constantly innovate and adapt. And again, I really think that academy teams would be really awesome to have in this game, just because of that fact. Like, you'll have a team that you can just run stuff against that you can be sure won't leak your strats and tactics to anybody else. So you can go into a tournament having practice stuff that you can be confident no one knows about, which is, I think, super important. How good do you think Andbox is compared to other NA teams? Well, I haven't seen enough just yet, and like I said, I think that there is that test as to once you kind of step into the top tier, how does it work in terms of adaptation? Once you've played Sentinels 5 times in a row, are you still able to have as good as results as you did in the first couple games? Or maybe you improve over time. It's it's just, you need that consistency, and I'm loving what I'm seeing so far. Again, like I said, I think that what we saw was a very well-rounded game where we didn't see really any. For me, there was no stylistic emphasis on anything that didn't make sense. Like, we kind of had all the pieces in this game. We had I guess I could list it off again. We had good awareness of how to use pacing to your advantage on the attack. We had a good foundation for a game plan. Like, conditioning the opponent with your default is huge, because what that does is it narrows the decision making down for the opposition, which allows you as the attackers to predict what they're going to do better, which allows you to be more consistent in how you can get ahead, get advantages, punish their mistakes, force them to make mistakes perhaps, stuff like that. That was there. The understanding of how to catch some of those things was there as well. Like, how do you catch the aggressions? And if they don't do the aggression, this is the other thing, is you can condition an opponent to do something, but they may not do that thing that you're expecting them to do. They may do something completely different. So you have to have within that round where you're calling to kind of maybe punish what the opponent's doing, you have to also at the same time understand, how do we build out of this? If we set up a trap and nothing happens, what is the next step? And I feel like Andbox were very comfortable in these scenarios. What was interesting and what we didn't see that much of, which I think in this attack in particular, is we didn't see much mid-rounding. And that's just because Immortals, frankly, were getting kind of wrecked in the first 6 rounds. They were not able to get any of those initial picks and really, throw any wrenches into the works. So for in the large part, this was really Andbox just hitting Immortals with stuff where it seemed quite structured from Andbox, and Immortals didn't really have a great response. They weren't, I don't know if it was a case of them not hitting their shots or what it was exactly, but what Andbox was doing was strong. So you can't really fault Immortals too much for that. But it does raise the question. I haven't seen enough of Andbox's mid-rounding just yet. So that's a little one way there from Poach with the Viper smoke. But yeah, the mid-roundings are super important because when you play really good teams, like let's say again, like I can just use Sentinels as the example, like any player on Sentinels can just pop off in any position. And so it can just create very random scenarios in the mid-round. So if you're a structured team, you have to also have that ability to play really dynamically and on the fly. And in this game, it's really interesting because unlike CS, where everyone has the smokes and flashes and you can pick up some of those nades too off of fallen teammates or opponents, in this game, it's going to be a different story because it's like, which agent do I have remaining? What abilities does that agent have, to my disposal? So it makes things even more crazy in certain respects. Yeah, coaching is definitely important. I think it's also a good mixture of experience on this team too. And I think that they have a lot of CS know-how here. You've got a lot of players that like know how to CS really, really well. Obviously, like Ye and Android are super experienced in CS and played on really structured teams for quite some time. Boy as well, also extremely experienced in CS. So you've got a bunch of players that really get that structured way of playing the game and that flow and how that can work. So yeah, I think they're going to do really well. I think they've got the skill and they've got the backing. So I would expect that. I would be surprised actually if Andbox doesn't stay in the top 8 in North America. I think that's super possible, especially given how some of the results we saw here as well. And also the willingness to experiment as well. With that said, we've been going for, I think, about an hour now. So I think that's a good moment to wrap things up here on the VOD review. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I think it was pretty successful for a solo episode, if I do say so myself. I appreciate you guys coming by and checking out this game. And if you missed it and you want to catch some of the earlier rounds and what Andbox were doing, then you can just check out the VOD that will go live tomorrow on the YouTubes. And equally, we'll be going live on Saturday as per the usual with more guests. I don't think we've announced any guests just yet, but that will be, I think, if you follow the Twitter, it's safe to say you're going to get, as soon as that information happens, it will go out on Twitter. So you can follow the Immortal Minds Twitter account if you want to stay abreast to the guests that we have coming on the show. And we're often getting like really good guests. So pretty much every episode is really interesting in that respect. And we just had Sideshow and Def on last week. And other than that, make sure jump into Discord if you're not there already. If you want to play some Valorant with the Discord peeps, the ever-growing Immortal Minds community. And other than that, I don't think I have too much else to tell you. So thank you again for watching, guys. And I will see you on the next one. Let's see if I can do the outro here. Yeah. Cheers, guys.